You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
A mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand.
We're going to have a great radio show today. We've got Sheriff Richard Mack on for the first hour. And he may carry over partially into the second hour. We also have a friend of his, someone who grew up very near his family, and that is Dr. Ann Blake Tracy. And we're going to be talking about the Second Amendment and psychotropic drugs and all the issues that are becoming very, very clear that are used as an attack against the Second Amendment. And I think most of our listeners recognize Sheriff Mack as being the founder of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, and also the really at the heart of the Supreme Court case that determined that the Second Amendment cannot be shut down because of politicians. And that was the Mac Prinz case that came before the Supreme Court, and we'll be talking about that today. So with that, Sheriff Mack, welcome to the radio program. Oh, we've got to get his sound.
Unmute your microphone there.
There we go. Got it. Thank you.
All right, good. I'm on. Very good.
Sheriff Mack, thank you for being a guest on our show. I know a lot of our listeners are really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. And we've seen all these attacks recently on the Second Amendment, and we see people like Beto O'Rourke and the a whole list of leftists on the platform talking about how we've got to get rid of, well, they call them assault weapons. But the fact is our article, the Second Amendment of our Constitution says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And, that's pretty clear, isn't it, Sheriff Mack?
Well, it is, especially, Dan, when you take into consideration that just about all state constitutions say it even stronger than our U.S. Constitution does. Arizona, Washington, New Mexico, several of them say shall not be impaired. So we have shall not be infringed, shall not be impaired in most state constitutions, and yet we have state legislatures and governors and the corrupt politicians in Washington, D.C., all acting as if the Second Amendment doesn't even exist, or that it says just the opposite of what it says. But I will tell you this. I think that what should I call it? The Patriots of America, the Freedom Movement of America, is giving Beto O'Rourke way too much credit, way too much airtime, and I think he was counting on that. He's a nothing. He's absolutely nothing, and I don't even pay any attention to him. The press called me and emailed me and said, "What is your stance on Beto O'Rourke?" And I said, "Who?" He's nothing. We don't care. We're not making a statement about Beto. We don't care what Beto says. We're not going to ever do what he says. He's never going to be in a position to tell us what to do. And so, in fact, our sheriffs, if he ever became president, would tell him what to do, stay out of our counties. But he's trying everything he can to gain some traction. And our stance is we're not going to help him.
Right, exactly. Well, let's mention, certainly the Second Amendment has nothing to do with hunting and target practice and this sort of thing. It was always designed to provide the citizens with a way to protect themselves against an overreaching government, which is exactly what we have now, and especially since Trump has been elected, because we see just how deep the deep state is.
Well, it is. It's really deep. It's really corrupt, and it's been very obvious how corrupt Washington, D.C., Congress is. We just had our conference. I was telling you earlier, we had our CSPOA conference last week, October 12th. And something happened there, Dan, that you and I haven't seen, perhaps in our lifetimes. And that is this. The New Mexico sheriffs, there's 33 sheriffs in New Mexico. 29 out of the 33 have stood against their own governor and their own legislature in standing for the Second Amendment and their state's provision in their constitution that the right of the people to keep and bear arms should not be impaired. This is one of the most unique examples. It's an unprecedented example of Democrat sheriffs joining Republican sheriffs in standing for liberty, in standing for their oath of office together. There's only 4 sheriffs who refused to be a part of that. 29 sheriffs standing unitedly, not talking about political parties, but just simply talking about the principles of freedom upon which America was founded, that they will not enforce any more gun control from the governor or the state legislature, that they will stand and protect the rights of the people to keep and bear arms. And here we go. The sheriffs of New Mexico setting the example. Would you not love to see the state capital, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the politicians there lead out and do the same thing as these wonderful sheriffs in New Mexico have done, 2 of which spoke at our convention our conference last Saturday. And wouldn't you love to see one time where the Democrats and Republicans got together on an issue except for increasing spending? That's the only time they ever get together, if it's to increase taxes or increase spending. Wouldn't you love it that there's a time where Democrats and Republicans got together, as these sheriffs have, and said, you know what? We're going to protect liberty. We're going to do everything in our power to protect the rights of the individual in this country and in our states. Wow, wouldn't that be something?
Well, it really would. And something very similar to that happened in the state of Colorado a few years back, when the sheriffs in the state of Colorado overwhelmingly supported the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms. And these so-called liberal states like Colorado and now New Mexico, the fact is it's only the metropolitan areas that have the idea that they can take away our Second Amendment rights. The rest of the state, they all believe we have those rights.
Well, I think I just saw Thumper holding up a great sign. He held up one of our speakers at our conference last Saturday, a chief of police. And when was the last time we had chiefs of police standing for the Second Amendment or standing for any freedom issue it's wonderful to see. And Chief Lauren Culp gave a wonderful speech defending the Second Amendment, but also defending the entire Constitution and defending the Bill of Rights and standing for liberty. And we have maintained at the CSPOA that you're very familiar with, and you being a member. And we want everybody to follow your example, Dan, and become a member of the CSPOA, because we're really, maybe along with Oath Keepers, we're really the only organization out there across the United States that has a peaceful and very effective solution to what's going on in our country. And I challenge everybody to look at a more effective solution that also avoids violence. Mm-hmm. And if you have the sheriffs and peace officers of this country in your own community, in your county, standing with you as you stand against the tyrannical laws of your state or the federal government, oh my goodness, you will win, and we will win, and we will keep this peaceful. And isn't that what we're really all about? So everybody, go to cspoa.org, cspoa.org, and become a member of this solution and this effective and peaceful solution. And we love Lauren Culp. Man, he is a great guy, and we sure wish him well, because he's running for governor now of Washington State.
Right.
If I may, Dan?
Yes, Stumper, go ahead.
Sorry. Yes, Lauren Culp lives about 100 miles north of me here in Washington State.
In Republic.
Yes, in Republic, Washington. And, a Republican from Republic for the Republic. That's my...
I love it.
No, I've talked with Lauren several times on the phone, and a very impressive man. And we here at Patriot Soapbox, we've already had him on for an interview, and we're going to have him back again. And we're certainly behind his effort as far as run for governor, because he's new blood, new fresh blood, and he definitely supports the Constitution and our right to keep and bear arms. And I can't say enough about the man. Thank you for putting your comments in there too, Sheriff. I've always admired your stand on this issue. So thank you very much for being on Patriot Soapbox today. Sorry for interrupting, Dan.
No, that's not an interruption. Go ahead.
One thing I would add there, Dan and Thumper, is that you can hear Chief Culp's entire presentation and speech. We have a link that you can pay $20 to join, and then we send you that link. And I believe that's at cspoa.org. So yeah, it's an amazing speech that he gave. And Sheriff Songer, also from Washington State, who got the Sheriff of the Year award, and the Sheriffs of New Mexico got the Sheriff's Association of the Year award. And holy moly, it was such a powerful conference. We really want to take that conference on the road nationwide and show people that this is real, and that the solution is real, and that, for heaven's sakes, when was the last time we had so many sheriffs across this country that are standing for liberty, not just the Second Amendment, as I said earlier, but for all of our rights. But, as they said, if the Second Amendment goes, they all go. So the Second Amendment is the one that's being attacked the most. So, of course, it's the one that we are standing for the most.
Well, and Sheriff Mack, that's one of the reasons that our country has lasted as long as it has, is the fact that we've always respected the right for citizens to stand up against government that was out of control. We haven't had to test that until this point in time. And we're getting to the point where, quite honestly, we may have to test that at some point in the very near future. And what you're talking about is, if we have sheriffs that are willing to stand up for the citizens and stand the stand, and not allow the government, the federal government, to come in and take over, we can avoid that kind of a civil war, because that's really what the other side wants.
Well, that's absolutely true, and that's why I am so encouraged by what the New Mexico sheriffs have done. But back 3 years ago, the Utah sheriffs did it. As a matter of fact, there were 500 sheriffs out of the 3,000, a little more 3,000 sheriffs in the country. 500 sheriffs stood against Biden and Obama on their gun control proposals. And it was really a preemptive strike because they had only made these suggestions. There was no legislation really being proposed. They were just saying, because of Sandy Hook, the situation there, they were just simply saying, well, we need more gun control. But they were being very vociferous about it, and it was frequent. And so these sheriffs took a preemptive stand and said, hey, we will not tolerate you coming into our counties and making criminals out of law-abiding citizens that we represent and that we work for. And so it was, again, a very powerful stand. And so now if you take all the sheriffs that have stood in the past 4 or 5 years alone, it's approaching about 700 or 800 sheriffs across the country. And I have maintained that if we get at least a fourth of all the sheriffs, and that's what 600 or 700, 800 would be, if we get a fourth of the sheriffs in this country to stand against tyranny and to stand against the destruction of our Constitution and stand for, I want to be positive there too, that we're not just standing against things, but we're standing for liberty and for our oath of office and for the Constitution. If we have that, we will win. And it's going to take courage for these sheriffs to stick with this and stand against any of the threats that are going to be coming their way.
No, you're right. And it is a local issue because our system of government was designed to be from the bottom up, not the top down. And the county could go ahead.
Change. I believe it's still top down, but you got to turn the pyramid upside down.
Right.
The triangle of power.
Right.
And we're at the top, and down at the bottom, the least important part of our government is the federal government. They're the smallest. They're supposed to stay out of our life, but we, the people, are at the top. So if you can see this triangle, it goes like this and then goes down to the bottom like this. And so it's just an upside down triangle of the order of power in America. But we, the people, are at the top, and at the bottom is Congress and the federal government. But they've turned it upside down and topsy-turvy, and that's the reason why we're so much trouble today, is because we have a stupid deep state that permeates Washington, D.C.
Well, they own the government in the district of criminals, and the reality.
They can have it there. Just tell them to stay there.
Yeah. Well, we like it that way, yeah. But, most people don't realize that your county commissioners and your county sheriff, the county commissioners are the top administrative body in our country, and the county sheriffs are the top law enforcement agents in the country, and that's the way it was always designed to be. Yeah, absolutely.
And historically, there were 3 former sheriffs who actually signed the Declaration of Independence. And I only remember one, but his name is Oliver Wolcott, Wolcott. People can look him up and find out. He was actually a former sheriff. And that was the first elected office in the United States, way before we became a country.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about common law and the fact that our system of government was meant to be local control of virtually everything, and that's the reason for the militia. We had a wonderful radio show here about 3-4 months ago where you were on with Dr. Edwin Vieira, and we were talking about how the role of the county sheriff works so well with common law. Let's talk about how that works together.
Well, the history of it, common law would be what has happened commonly over the centuries in America. And the first one, as we mentioned, would be the office of the sheriff. And the sheriff has always been, as he is or she now, the protector of the people. the keeper of the peace in his county. And it's an amazing tribute to the oath of office that it actually includes that the sheriff takes that oath, but that he will protect his county and his citizens from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And so, really, the sheriff has no choice in the matter. He must fulfill that oath.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it means standing against federal agents or federal bureaucrats, he's already sworn an oath to do just that. And it's amazing how I get assailed by the media and a few others that I'm the one that has said that sheriffs get to pick and choose which laws to enforce. Actually, it's just the opposite. I say they have no choice in the matter. They have to enforce the Constitution, whether they like it or not.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And there's your common law.
Sheriff?
Right. And I've never heard anybody say otherwise, Sheriff Mack, that from your end, I've always heard you say the same thing. The laws are there to be enforced, and when they change the laws, then you will change the enforcement.
Yeah, and it really boils down so that we can tell all the tyrants in this country and those who want to pervert our Constitution, it really boils down to not how much legislation is made, but it depends on how they are enforced.
Right.
And if the sheriff says, I'm not enforcing that, don't tell me I have to follow your tyrannical laws. Don't tell me I have to enforce an unconstitutional law or mandate, because I won't do it. And then they'll say, well, who are you to decide what's constitutional? And they said, I took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. It's up to me to keep that oath. I don't ask permission from anyone else to keep my oath. I will keep it because I know and understand the Constitution and the intent of the Founding Fathers. I will do that. I will not go along with you or your agenda because somebody from a big PAC gave you a bunch of money. I will uphold and defend the Constitution until somebody wants to remove me from this job. Until then, the Constitution will be enforced, especially the Bill of Rights. Sir.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Thumper, you've got a question from one of our callers.
Yeah, from one of our listeners out there for Sheriff Mack here. He wants to know, has anybody ever challenged the state or local governments for charging a fee for firearm carry or even purchases based on the provisions established in precedent by the Voting Rights Act? The precedent was made that people cannot be charged a fee for exercising a right, not a privilege, but a right.
Well, I've always stood against those. I don't know that anyone has ever sued on the fee. But I'm against the concealed carry permit laws. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a double-edged sword because we've also had some people get arrested who carry without the permit. Mm-hmm. And here again, those are by ignorant officers of the law, and sometimes even ignorant sheriffs who don't understand that a citizen is not to be arrested simply for carrying a gun, whether they have concealed carry laws in that state or not. So we actually have an example of a sheriff in Liberty County, Florida, former Sheriff Nick Finch, who nullified the arrest of a citizen in his county for that very thing. A deputy stopped the individual. The deputy saw a bulge in his pocket. He asked what it was. The guy said, it's a gun. He arrested the guy for carrying a concealed gun in his own car, for heaven's sakes. Mm. And so he was arrested. The sheriff went down and released the gentleman from his jail, and did exactly what a constitutional sheriff's supposed to do. And I say constitutional sheriff. All sheriffs are supposed to be constitutional. Right. All sheriffs are supposed to be doing this. And so then the state came in and arrested Sheriff Finch for doing that. And then the trial happened, and a citizen grand jury, or a grand jury of citizens in his county, found him not guilty. And that's the best way to nullify these kinds of laws, have those sort of things happen. But I would still like to see, and maybe it's happened somewhere, but the caller who gave you that question is absolutely correct. The state or the federal government have no business whatsoever charging a fee for the American people exercising what is already guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution.
Well, that caller was Captain Liberty, by the way. Yeah,
Well, Captain Liberty is correct. And there's been one case where that sort of came up, and that is they didn't address the fee in this one, but in the state of Utah, back about 5 or 6 years ago, the University of Utah tried to establish a law that said you could not carry carry concealed on their campus. And the court said, you can't make a law that we've already established in the state that is lawful. You can't make a law against it. And so somebody needed to take that one to the next level and say, nor can you charge a fee for it, state. So anyway, so it has come up a little bit, but I have yet to hear where somebody's actually challenged the fee for that. And what should happen is that sheriffs should simply across the country stop enforcing the concealed carry permit laws, because I don't need a permit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. Well, we're going to have you speaking at our Red Pill Expo in Mesquite, Nevada, and that's coming up just in a few weeks. We're less than 3 weeks away from that event. So I know that you and Ann Blake Trace are going to be talking together on that platform, and because we've got a serious concern in this country that all of our rights are going to be stripped if we take away those Second Amendment rights. And the reality is that the psychotropic drugs and a lot of the things that are going on in our country right now that are leading to some of these mass shootings are things that are quite preventable, but the opposition seems to concentrate on gun control instead of on dealing with psychotropic drugs in our schools. You were a FBI, or I'm sorry, not FBI. You were a drug enforcement officer in the state of Utah, and you saw firsthand how drugs were really becoming a very, very serious part of the problem with law enforcement in the state. I'd love to have you talk a little bit about that and how drugs have become kind of a vehicle to promote gun control.
Well, it's been used as a vehicle to promote bigger government and a police state. Mm-hmm. And I hesitate a little bit to lead out with that because I want law enforcement to understand that I hate drug abuse. No one hates drug abuse more than I do. I absolutely find it so appalling. Mm-hmm. But what we have done is make the cure worse than the disease. Right. And I'm sorry that I was ever a part of doing that. But before I went undercover, I was dead set in favor and dead set against decriminalization or legalization of any drug. Now I feel just the opposite. My libertarian views and my freedom views are such that I believe that we should legalize all of them. And look at who really are the biggest drug dealers. We've arrested several doctors just in the recent past because it's been found that they are prescribing opioids by the tens of thousands every month, and that they're making big money off of that. And so we've seen how misdiagnoses by doctors have caused about 125,000 deaths every year, yet marijuana has caused none. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that if people are high on any drug, even a prescribed drug, that they should not be arrested for DUI. They should. I don't give breaks on DUI to anybody, and it's extremely dangerous for anybody to drive while under the influence of any drug. But I'm telling you right now, it's been a horrible mess that our drug laws have caused, and I believe it's unquestionable and irrefutable that our drug laws have created the cartels in Latin America.
Mm-hmm.
And those Latin American countries, especially Mexico and Colombia, are now cartel-driven and cartel-run countries. And it is the cartel that has caused the crisis at the border, and yet we have our Democrat liberals and leftists and communists that are actually supporting open borders because they want more Democrat votes in this country. They don't care anything about national security or stopping drugs coming into our country. All they care about is getting more voters. And that's been a real shame. It's a disgrace. And it's just typical of playing politics instead of doing what's right for America.
Yeah, you're right. And I think of the confiscation laws that have been put into place that have taken, so much.
The asset forfeiture laws.
Asset forfeiture laws and things like that became part of the so-called war on drugs. And they're so totally unconstitutional and totally against everything we stand for as a country. And yet they got their ground, they got their footing in the war on drugs. And so many of these things, they start out, they sound great, but then they end up destroying everything. Thumper, I've got a few videos there that I'd like to see if you would. We've got one with Tucker Carlson on there, and I'd like to play a few of those, and then I'd like to get your response to them, Sheriff Mack, because I think we've got really the tail wagging the dog in this country, and we've got so many of these goofy politicians. They've got great ideas on how to control everything we do. And then they'll be the first ones to complain when, in fact, people start breaking the laws, because you create unnecessary laws, you're going to create crime. It's just that simple.
Right.
Yeah.
So you want the Tucker Carlson?
Yeah, let's do the Tucker Carlson one. It's toward the end.
Oh, the latter time frame there?
Yeah, let's take a look at that one, and we'll. Right. I kind of want Sheriff Mack's comments on that one.
Okay. All right, here we go. We'll get it up on the screen there for everyone. And
there he is.
There we go. Now we have to do this in 27-second sound bites to meet the requirements for the not
copyright laws.
Copyright laws and all that. So here we go.
Australia implemented gun control. Well, confiscation. They took the guns away from the population by force, and not just from criminals and people who've been convicted of wrongdoing. The government of Australia took guns from law-abiding people who had done nothing wrong. They punished the innocent. What exactly did that look like? Well, here's an ad from one of Australia's gun confiscation efforts. It shows naked men in a prison shower and warns the public to turn their guns in or else they'll be sent to prison too.
Okay, we'll stop it there.
Wow. Yeah, that's the kind of nonsense that we hear from people like, and I appreciate what you say about nobody lending credence to people like Beto O'Rourke, but the fact is they're out there, and this is exactly the kind of confiscation they're talking about.
Yeah, it is, and it's really sad because they want to use England or Australia as examples that gun control has worked. It really, if they would tell the whole story, it has failed miserably, and it's put so many people in prison that should not be there, and innocent people in prison, and it's just an outrage. But now, not only is California trying to make laws against assault knives, but so is London, and England legislature, the parliament there, has considered several times making laws against possession of oversized knives or those mean-looking knives like in Crocodile Dundee. And so because their deaths have not changed, their death rate and crime rates and aggravated assault rates have not changed. Only there's just a few less gun crimes. So their rapes are still there, the assaults are still there, the aggravated assaults are still there, and then crime actually went up in Australia exponentially after they picked up everybody's guns. So this is a irrefutable fact. I've interviewed people who are in prison. I've seen other people's interviews of people in prison who say unequivocally that they do not want to attack a person or enter a home to burglarize if they have any idea that that person or that home are well armed. They try to avoid those. Yet the anti-gunners and the anti-Second Amendment people continue to ignore that amazing principle. And so, and Dr. John Lott, I think you mentioned him earlier. Dr. John Lott wrote a book, More Guns, Less Crime. And you know the significance about that book is just simply this. You didn't have to pull a trigger. All you had to do is brandish it. All you had to do is show somebody that you have a gun, that you are armed. And that's an amazing statistic there because it stops the violence. It doesn't create violence. Right. And so, yeah, I mean, but even if, now I don't want to make a mistake on this, Dan, even if you had some sort of legitimate statistical analysis, if the statistics showed that gun control actually reduces crime, it is still against the law. You don't get to change the Second Amendment. You don't get to violate the law just because you have some statistics that prove that getting rid of guns creates less crime. That's what the left has been trying to do, and sometimes we join them on that and try to prove that it doesn't happen. It's still against the law, and you don't have any right to pass laws that are unlawful and unconstitutional just because you have some statistical analysis. Where else could we do that except with the Second Amendment? Right. I mean, for heaven's sakes, maybe we should do statistics about the press creating crimes because they lie all the time.
Yeah, well, I have to tell you, I mean, you take a look at states like Florida that have very liberal gun laws. As soon as they open up their gun laws, the crime rate goes down. It's just a very, very straightforward relationship.
They were one of the first ones to go with concealed carry permits. Now, again, I still oppose those, and we did. Gun Owners of America and I opposed the law, the actual technicalities of the law. But, you know, it did reduce crime in Florida, and nobody could argue with it. And they've been very successful. I just wish they would say, like Arizona, we now have open carry and concealed carry, and we don't have to get permits.
Right. Well, that's one reason that we now own a home down there. For that very reason.
And not just for the weather in the winter.
Well, that's part of it. Anyway, well, one of the things that always comes out in all these gun control debates is that the statistics that they use are so skewed. They're so wrong. And if you look at the areas with the highest gun crime rates, it's in the areas with the most restrictive and the most difficult gun laws in those areas. Chicago is a perfect example of that. You know, they say, well, if we made it a national law, then people couldn't get guns. That is some complete crap. You can build guns yourself. I mean, they do it in prison. It's called a zip gun. You know, it can be done if people have the idea that they want to do it. Let's talk about them.
Well, very easily. You're absolutely correct. But, you know, another thing, too, along that same train of thought, Dan, is there's 350 to 400 million guns in America.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way they can ever come up with a legitimate way to confiscate those, call them back, close the doors on the barn, because it's impossible. They will never.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had some people say, well, the impossible we've got to try because the impossible is possible if you really try. No, it is impossible for them to take away guns, and that is why, Dan, they never propose laws that take guns away from criminals.
Right.
They only propose how they're going to take them from you and me.
From law abiding. Right.
Exactly. And Beto is a typical example of that. And for him to suggest that law enforcement is going to go along with him in his ridiculous suggestion that if they don't turn in their guns, that law enforcement's coming after you and there will be consequences. I mean, what an idiot. But yeah, I mean, if he wanted to debate me about this, I would tell him as soon as you get above 1%, I will. But I'm not debating you. You're a nothing. I would love to debate some other candidates who really have a legitimate chance of changing policy in America. But that I will tell you, I'm really impressed with that Congresswoman from Hawaii because she doesn't like Hillary Clinton. And she calls a spade when she says how corrupt Hillary Clinton is. And they've been feuding, and it's really been helping. I think, is it Tulsi?
Tulsi Gabbard?
Gabbard. Yeah. What a wonderful lady. And I find her very genuine. There's not very many Democrats that I say that about, but she seems very genuine. And I believe that I could have a good conversation with her. I would love to sit down and talk with her.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are a lot of people in the Democratic Party who are pretty strong supporters of the Second Amendment. It's just you don't hear from them. You don't hear about them. You hear about the let's face it, the lamestream media doesn't want to talk about the people who believe in the Constitution. They want to talk about the people who don't. Just that simple.
It is that simple, and it's a very sad commentary on our media. But I don't understand why some of those networks have made it. And then I found out, despite how they're failing, their big, rich, billionaire owners keep pumping money into them. Otherwise, they would be failing, and they would be out of business.
Yeah, if it wasn't for people like George Soros and Bill Gates and Ted Turner, yep, they'd be out of business. They really would. Yeah. Absolutely.
And now, don't you really hope that former New York Mayor Bloomberg actually gets in the race? That's got to be a real entertainer there, man.
Yeah,
I love being entertained by those people.
Well, I'd love to see him lose his billions, and he's liable to do that.
I mean, I always call him Mr. Big Gulp because when he was mayor, he wanted to make it illegal to buy big gulps and get soda pop and sugar off the market. And I tell my students at school, my scholars at school, that pretty soon they're just going to have us all have a federal credit card or just chip us. And when we go to the Dairy Queen, they'll run our credit card or they'll run the chip in a scanner and say, oh, you can't come here today. You were here last week, and you only get to get ice cream once a week.
Right.
So really, that's really what Bloomberg is proposing. And so, it's astonishing to me how Democrats and liberals and leftists want to force everybody into a cocoon of behavior, force everybody into government schools, and force everybody to give up their guns, and yet they try to pretend how magnanimous they are and how they support individual liberty. It doesn't quite mesh with what they say and do. And as a matter of fact, they are quite fascist. They are very communistic. They're very dictatorial. And I believe, and I've said this before, that America right now is a democratic dictatorship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. We've gone from a constitutional republic to a constitutional democracy. We're now in the phase where you would call us a socialist democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And the next step is outright Marxism. It's that simple.
It's a dictatorship. It really is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It is. And it's sadly, and this is something that's come out with this discussion of the deep state, but sadly, much of the dictatorship is based on the administrative state. It's not so much the elected officials, it's all the appointed people who have taken the reins of government, and they don't have to answer to the voters.
Oh, that's true, and yeah, that is true. We are run by a bureaucratic nightmare at this point, from people, from federal agents who are answerable to no one. Mm-hmm. And how could they be? It's too gargantuan to have any oversight. And people within the federal government are just there for their big salaries. They're not trying to fix anything. They're just simply there for politics and for money. And it's a real sad situation.
It is, yeah.
And it's really sad that Trump has not been able to drain the swamp. Mm-hmm. The swamp has really gone after him, and we're seeing the result of that. It's gone so far now that they're doing a ridiculous impeachment that has absolutely no merit.
Well, I think, Sheriff Mack, I think in reality, and this is one reason we need a second term for Trump, I don't think most people had any idea how deep the deep state was. I've considered myself pretty well tuned in on what's been happening in the world. I've been in this fight for 40 some years. But the reality is it's much deeper than I think any of us realized. And we're just starting to see that now, how totally the bureaucrats control the whole process.
Well, it is. And I will tell you this. I don't think this is bureaucrats that have done this. Certainly some of the enforcement is. But I blame Congress, mm-hmm. both Republicans and Democrats alike, because we are still being forced to pay $500 million a year to Planned Parenthood so that we can keep killing babies in this country. Right. And I think that's probably the greatest outrage that exists in this country. And it is so pathetic that our Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, have not only allowed that to continue, but have promoted it. And Republicans refused to stand against that when they had the majority in both the House and the Senate and the presidency, and they refused to stop funding a private organization with our tax dollars. Totally unconstitutional. In fact, I would call it criminal.
It is.
That is malfeasance in office. It's misappropriation of funds. And it's going completely contrary to our Declaration of Independence that puts our whole entire system based on preserving life. Right. It's astonishing.
It is. And you're right. It is criminal what they're doing with that.
It is.
And it shows that the progressives own really both parties. The fact that the president hasn't had more support from his own party tells us that many in the Republican Party are progressives, just like the Democrats are.
Sad but true, and yet if you said that, they'd try to defend it. And I would just simply say, what have you done to stop abortion or to stop funding Planned Parenthood, which we know is such an evil organization? The videos and undercover videos that have surfaced about them. And so just to put that in perspective, $1 billion from taxpayer dollars being forced from us. We go to jail if we don't pay it. $1 billion every 2 years to Planned Parenthood. Good grief. We don't need to look any further than that to tell how far down and debased we have become in America.
Absolutely, and it shows how far we've fallen from God's word and from, what was the foundation for the Second Amendment, which was common law, natural law. It was based on biblical principles, and when we start allowing the murder of babies, we've fallen a long ways from that.
And we call that a constitutional right, a woman's constitutional right. Can you imagine anything so outlandish and debased as that?
No, you can't really. Well, let's talk about CSPOA. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about how the organization was founded and all the things that are important, and why the listeners ought to be joining and supporting your organization.
Well, thanks. Primarily because of the work that we've been doing and what we've seen just recently. The hundreds and hundreds of sheriffs that have been standing for liberty have been trained at our conventions. And we've actually gone to some sheriff's offices who just called us and said, will you come out here? I had one out in Virginia a couple of years ago. So will you come and train our entire office? Dispatchers and everybody alike were trained in the ethical application of our oath of office, trained in the Bill of Rights, trained that maybe there's some things that we're doing wrong. And this good sheriff there, Dan, I told him, I said, there's some things in law enforcement that we need to correct. We can't keep pointing our fingers at the legislative branch or the judicial branch. We need to clean our own house before we try to clean theirs.
Mm-hmm.
He said, what do you mean? I said, well, how about asset forfeiture laws? How about another one? DUI checkpoints, where we stop everybody on the road without probable cause. We just pull everybody over and see if they've been drinking. And we ask them for their papers, or we don't allow them to go anywhere. I mean, this is crazy. And he said, well, okay, what's the solution? I said, real simple. You can keep doing them. They have to be voluntary. And you know what that good sheriff did after I explained the whole thing? That good sheriff went to lunch and went to his office and changed that policy that all administrative checkpoints, whether for DUI or for whatever, would be voluntary, and that people would have the right, as they do now, as they're supposed to opt out of them. And it still is an effective way to go after drunk drivers. But there's lots of other ways. And for law enforcement to pretend that that's the only way to go after drunk drivers is ridiculous, because jurisdictions usually only use them 2 or 3 times a year. There's lots of drunk drivers the rest of the time. And there's other ways to go about that. But plain and simply, the CSPOA, the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, is all about creating guards of the Republic, guards of our Constitution, and guards of liberty. It boils down to this. What are we really after in America? Is liberty our ultimate goal in the judicial branch? Is justice and liberty the ultimate goal in the legislative branch? Is liberty the ultimate goal in the executive branch? And that's the branch that we work for and within. And that is, every sheriff is part of the executive branch. How we enforce the laws, and that we enforce the laws according to our oath of office and the Constitution, so that we'll have a Sheriff Finch who will stand and nullify the arrest of a citizen who got arrested for just having possession of a gun. A person who's not a criminal, who just simply had a gun in his pocket. He was going to be charged with a felony for that. But we have sheriffs who are interposing all across this country. Sheriff Brad Rogers, who interposed on behalf of an Amish farmer in his jurisdiction in Elkhart County, Indiana, who told the FDA, you're not coming back in my county and abusing this man and his family any longer. If you have probable cause, if you have due process and duly signed warrants, you're welcome here. If you do not have that, I will arrest you for trespassing. This is the kind of sheriff we're after. We're also, we honored a man by the name of Deputy Stan Lennick in the Albany airport, who worked for the local sheriff's office in Albany County. and he protected people who were handing out flyers in their airport. And the local manager of the airport wanted to arrest him. There's good Sheriff Brad Rogers right there.
Mm-hmm.
And this Deputy Lennox stood for the rights of these people passing out flyers. And he said, we want you to know that this is your constitutional right. You see, that's what we're after. We want to hear deputies. We want to hear sheriffs. We want to hear patrol officers that are actually using the Constitution in their everyday language, protect the Constitution, protect the God-given rights of every citizen. And when we teach this to our nation's law enforcement officers and our peace officers all across this country, we're going to restore liberty tomorrow. We don't have to wait for another piece of legislation. We don't have to wait for another election. We can do it now. And that's why every citizen should be working with these constitutional sheriffs. And that's why we need you to join. Help fund this organization. Help fund this movement. Work with your sheriffs. Get them to our next training that we're going to have. I think it looks like we're going to be going to Utah either late winter or early spring to put on our next one. And so this is such an opportunity for all of us to work together on this and to join this holy cause of liberty that we have maintained all along. We have proof that it works. We have proof that if we do this now, that the sheriffs will respond accordingly to the proper constitutional training. Mm-hmm. And can you imagine now that we would see on the side of police cruisers, guard of the Republic, guard of the Constitution, instead of this pride, integrity, guts thing, you know? Mm-hmm. And they usually say, the cars will say integrity. Let's just keep it simple. We're the guards of the Republic, and that's what we're supposed to be, and that's what we train them to be. And I guarantee you, there'll be a lot less cops shooting innocent people or macing or tasing innocent people in this country when we find out what our true job is.
No, I agree. And Sheriff Mack, that's something that you talked about earlier, how we increase the amount of laws. We put all these laws on the books that basically criminalize just about every kind of behavior. Yeah. What a great way to promote anarchy and to promote lousy government and rebellion by the citizens. If we leave our people alone, if we let our people really, let's say, control their own destiny, they need to be allowed to be citizens. And if we do that, the likelihood is that we won't have the problems that we've got today.
We won't. And we literally train them in that. We train officers and sheriffs to know that their people in their jurisdiction have a right to be left alone. Mm-hmm. And that's what you were just describing.
Amen. Yeah. Well, I know the one that you're talking about in Pennsylvania, and it was an Amish farmer who was doing the horrible crime of selling unpasteurized milk to private citizens, or in Indiana, yeah, and to citizens who didn't want to buy pasteurized milk. Yeah. What a crime!
What if we were allowed to buy the kind of milk we want for ourselves, and don't have government make that choice for me? Wouldn't that be amazing?
And the kind that we used to drink as kids, and it never killed us then.
No kidding.
Yeah. What a concept, huh?
Yeah. What a concept. Well, I have to say, we're excited about the Red Pill Expo coming up in a couple of weeks. And you spoke at our last Red Pill Expo in Hartford, Connecticut. But that's, you said, well, I look forward to going to Connecticut, because that's one jurisdiction I have yet to appear in. And I think Mesquite, Nevada, you've been there before. You know that's an area that appreciate what you've got to say.
I think so. And I think we'll get a good crowd there from the Southern Utah people, and then the Nevada people, and Arizona, Northern Arizona people. But I'll tell you what, I really am looking forward to it. I've been to Mesquite a lot of times. We've had a seminar there. And it's a great location. It's a great place to have a conference.
It is.
And it's
very
put on by my
affordable.
good friend Ed Griffin.
There you go. It's put on by Ed, and it is an area that's very affordable. It's a very family-friendly location. People think of Nevada, they naturally think of the gambling and the prostitution and all the rest. Our program is being put on at the the Rising Star Sports Complex, and it's a non-smoking, non-gambling facility. They do have gambling across the street and a sister facility, but this is really geared for kids. It's geared for families, and that's something I know you really, really support, is the bringing our kids up to understand what their constitutional responsibilities as well as their rights are.
Amen. And I really appreciate that I'm going, and my wife and I are looking forward to it very much. We hope everybody will come there and participate in this great event.
Yeah, we are, and Blake Tracy is going to be joining us in the next hour. I know that you and Ann kind of grew up together in the same area. She's a little bit senior of you, but your families are quite close, aren't they?
We were for the longest time, and her little sister Patty and I graduated from high school together.
Wow. That's great. Well, this is going to be a fun event, and I do remind our listeners, go to redpillexpo.org and buy your tickets, because we have a tremendous number of great speakers there, including Sheriff Mack, and we are going to be talking about all the things that the deep state and the controlled media want to shove under the rug. And certainly your presentation in Hartford, Connecticut was wonderful. You talked about what the sheriff would have done in the name of integration, and Rosa Parks on the bus, and how she was the proper sheriff would have done it differently, and you're spot on with that. That's exactly
we took an internal poll, and it turned out that I was second best, only second to Ed Griffin himself.
That's dynamite. Yeah, that's dynamite.
Just teasing on that one.
You're certainly one of my favorites, so I have to say that was a good poll. Well, Sheriff Mack, you're about to leave us, but tell our listeners, first of all, how private citizens can support their local sheriffs, ways that can happen. I'll give you another second to talk, too, about some of the publications, some of the books, some of the things that you've been involved with, and then really how our Second Amendment, how important it really is, and why our citizens need to stand up and be counted.
Well, if you go to our website, cspoa.org, you'll be able to purchase the 7 books that I've written. None more powerful than the 50-page booklet, The County Sheriff, America's Last Hope. And that will train not only you, but your sheriff. And you should make sure that your sheriff has one. The other one that I highly recommend is just a little booklet. You can get 3 for $5, I think, of the VSS, the Victory for State Sovereignty. And the Victory for, there's the County Sheriff, America's Last Hope. But the Victory for State Sovereignty is a review of my Supreme Court case when I won a landmark case against the Clinton administration on the Brady bill. And Justice Scalia wrote this decision, and in it he puts what I now call the equation for liberty. And I will show people that equation when I'm in Mesquite 3 weeks from yesterday. So everybody get there. It's going to be astonishing. And there it is, Victory for State Sovereignty, right there with all the flags on the front.
Right.
That's it. And seriously, that thing is so cheap. But everybody should be passing those out so you can prove to people what that equation for liberty is. There it is in bright pink. But thanks so much for having me on today.
Oh, you're welcome, Sheriff Mack. And I have to tell you, I did give your book on the role of the county sheriff to our county sheriff when he was running for office. And he
Good. Every
he
citizen.
shared that with his deputies. I know for a fact he did. So
Good.
yeah,
Well-
it's that's the way it works. Citizens need to be involved, and they represent the voting of public office. And it's amazing how politicians pay attention when they're up for re-election.
Amen.
I have a quick question for Sheriff Mack there.
Mhm.
Have you had an influence on the sheriff here in Spokane County?
Is that Sheriff Oz?
Yes.
He and I have had several conversations. I think I've had some impact on him. He did come to one of my speeches there about 10, 12 years ago.
Okay.
But he still hasn't taken that final leap of faith, and he still needs some work.
I would have to agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
All right. Thank you, too.
thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. It'll be a wonderful, wonderful event and a wonderful time. Thank you.
Looking forward to it. See you soon.
All righty. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Sheriff.
You bet.
Okay. I think, is Ann Blake Tracy on yet? Or is,
I think she is just.
yeah, there she is. Hi, Ann. Well, I think her.
No, she's not muted. So, Ann, can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Ann, hi. Can you hear us? Doesn't look like it.
She might not be hearing us. Okay, she muted.
Let's see if we can get her to unmute her microphone. I'll try to text her. There we go. Maybe she did. Hi, Ann. How are you?
Okay, you need to unmute.
Yeah, please unmute your microphone. We can't hear you. No, we're still there.
There it is.
Oh, there we go. We got you. Okay.
I'm the right button.
All right, wonderful. And we just had Sheriff Richard Mack on, and we were talking about the CSPOA, and we were talking about the Second Amendment, and many of the things that really are part of our constitutional guarantees that really preserve our liberty as a republic. I want people to know more about you because, Ann, you've been at the very forefront of the movement to expose the psychotropic drugs, the drugging of America, and how that has so much to do with the mass shootings that have been going on all over the country. Tell our listeners a little bit more about you. You've testified before Congress. You've testified before various federal agencies. You've been really at the tip of the spear, and I want people to get to know more about you, and then we'll talk about what an impact that's had on our Second Amendment rights.
All right. I've done everything I could think of to try to wake people up to what these drugs are doing. In fact, clear back in 1992, I called the NRA and warned them. I said, if you don't help me educate the public about these drugs and what they can do, they will be the means by which they take America's guns, because I knew that they would produce enough violence that people would think they had no other choice.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's been the biggest lie in medicine we have ever seen. They've told everyone that if they're depressed, their serotonin levels are low. What is low is their ability to metabolize serotonin, not serotonin itself.
Mm-hmm.
Because serotonin is what LSD and PCP increase to produce hallucinations. So as you take these drugs over time, they will gradually increase the serotonin to the point you're in full-blown psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
I even had a 16-year-old kid come up to me one day in an office that I'd walked into because I was wearing a button that said, just say no to Prozac. He walked up to me and said, why should I say no to Prozac? I'm on it. So I explained that to him, and he said, well, I've been reading these books. He reaches into his backpack, and here's these great, big, thick medical books. And he said, according to what they say in these books, if I stay on this drug, I'm going to go psychotic. And I said, well, you read it right.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody bothered to go in and really read the research. And then as soon as the drugs came out, so did all the falsified research. And now you've got journal editors, medical journal editors that have been walking away saying, I'm not going to be an advertising agency for these drug companies anymore, because basically that's all I am.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've proven time and time again that the doping of America in our schools and the fact that the schools are some of the worst for peddling these drugs, you've proven that to our Congress. Why haven't they listened? Why are they so in the pocket of Big Pharma?
Well, I think the biggest question is, why hasn't the FDA listened?
Yeah.
Very first hearing I testified in with them was in 1991. And everyone on that panel had financial interest in the drug companies.
Wow. Wow.
It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why they came out and said, well, there's no problem with Prozac. We don't need to worry. It's not causing these issues. I came back home to Utah, where I was living at the time. And within a month, we had a mother in our neighborhood getting her 3 children ready for church. She took a hammer and sheep shearing knife and killed all 3 before she stabbed herself in the heart twice.
Wow. And she was on those drugs.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's, you've been fighting a very, very uphill battle for a very long time. But let's talk about how these mass shootings, how almost always when there's a mass shooting, we end up finding out that there was a drug problem involved in virtually all of them.
Right. Well, when there are some of them that actually test out as PCP or amphetamine, why would we be surprised?
Mm-hmm.
It's just nobody knows. You call it medicine, and it's okay because it's coming from your doctor.
Well, yeah, and we know how that works because you and I have talked about this earlier. We know how Big Pharma even got started. And we know about Holly Lee and the influence on the medical colleges by the Rockefeller family. So it always goes back to the same thing. It's always back to the money, isn't it?
I've definitely learned that.
Mm-hmm.
I started out very naive, thinking it would take a year, maybe 2 at the most, with all the red tape there is in getting things like this taken care of. But I had no idea what kind of money I was fighting. Oh my gosh. We're talking billions, trillions at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I can't count that high, so I still don't really understand it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been awful. But, we went back and we testified to the FDA in 2004. We testified again in 2006. And the information that they were given should have been enough for them to pull these drugs from the market clear back then.
Mm-hmm.
So many lives would have been saved.
Mm-hmm.
So many mass shootings would not have happened.
Right. And the other, even if they didn't pull them off the market, they should have at least started some kind of studies or something to find out.
They already had the studies, Dan. It was already there. My book first came out in 1994, and I had spent 3.5 years combing through all the research we had on serotonin, and it made it just as clear as could be that the worst thing you could do for the human brain would be to increase serotonin, which is exactly what these drugs were designed to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they had it all. They knew it caused depression, anxiety, psychosis, schizophrenia, mania. They knew all of that. And that's just a small list of what we know that increasing serotonin does.
Mm-hmm.
So they knew it caused violent crime and suicide and repeated suicide attempts and very violent suicide. All the stuff that we're seeing as a result of these drugs. It was it was there before they put the drugs on the market. They knew what they were doing.
Mm-hmm. They did. And let's talk numbers. Let's talk about how many billions, and you even mentioned trillions of dollars the drug industry reap off of these kind of drugs. Let's talk about
incredible. That. I mean, they've been fined billions of dollars for actually encouraging doctors to prescribe off-label. The drug that they've really gotten in trouble for is gabapentin, which isn't even classified. That's also called Neurontin. And then there's Lyrica, which is, they're all in the same family. Mm-hmm. And they're also serotonin reuptake inhibitors. We saw fen-phenin Redux that were pulled from the market because they were killing people. But most people did not know that fen-phenin Redux increased serotonin. And the main reason they were pulled from the market was not the heart damage, not the lung damage that was killing so many, but it was actually brain damage.
Wow.
We had murder-suicides with those drugs as well.
Tell our listeners a little bit about, some of the effects that you've run across that aren't mentioned by the drug companies. They always have this list of things that are side effects from drugs. Let's talk about the real side effects.
Well, actually, when Prozac was the first one introduced, there were 500 different side effects.
Wow.
So I don't think we got time to go through them all. But anyway, the most important one that should have been warned of long ago, you should hear this the minute they give you this drug, is that it can produce serious sleep issues. It represses REM sleep. And when I say it, I mean any of these drugs in this family. So you got Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, Luvox, Celexa, Lexapro, Cymbalta, Effexor. It just goes on and on. And so you've got all of those drugs that can cause murder and suicide, because when you start acting out the nightmares that the drugs caused, they know that it includes murder and suicide. That's exactly what happened to comedian Phil Hartman. Mm-hmm. That's also what happened to Robin Williams. And his wife has already been able to show that she said she found out that he had Lewy bodies syndrome. Well, Lewy bodies is nothing more than clumps of protein build up in the brain. And these drugs are the highest I know of in protein binding. 98% protein binding.
Wow.
It's unbelievable. And so when the drugs go in and bind to protein in the brain, you're going to get clumps of protein.
And tell our listeners what those clumps of protein do.
Well, obviously, they interfere with the sleep and produce this sleepwalk state where you have no paralysis during sleep and you can get up and act out whatever you are dreaming about. But sadly, those generally aren't pleasant dreams, they're nightmares.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And Brent Hartman had been writing a screenplay about a woman who shoots her husband in his sleep. And so what would she be dreaming about?
Mm-hmm.
Something she's been working on.
And that's exactly what happened. Yeah.
Eric Harris at Columbine had the same recurring dream over and over about shooting the kids at Columbine before he actually did it.
Wow. Let's talk about that, Columbine, because there was a young student who you've talked about on our radio program before, the young man who went to school with a gun and threatened his classmates and had never done anything like that before he was put on Prozac or one of the drugs like that. Talk about that young man.
Yeah, that's a young man that looked very much like Eric Harris, but he became friends with one of the first boys who was shot at Columbine, and that's probably why you're mixing them. He had his experience about a year after Columbine happened, and it was up in Washington State. But we all got together and did a movie with Gary Null called The Drugging of Our Children. And it's online.
Mm-hmm.
You can watch it right on our website, the full movie. It's really good. But you can see Corey explain what happened. He was just a really good farm kid. Never gave his parents any trouble at all. He was very shy. And that's why they gave him Paxil.
Mm-hmm.
And he had taken it for about a year. And then the doctor decided, because it didn't seem to be working for him anymore, in other words, he couldn't push off the side effects that much.
Mm-hmm.
So it was beginning to really get to him. He was becoming more toxic. So the doctor decided they needed to switch to a different antidepressant because that might work better. So within a 3-week period, he took him off of Paxil, and that is way too fast.
Mm.
You cannot come off these drugs that quickly. People talk about the problem in coming off heroin or any of these opiates. It's absolutely nothing in comparison to coming off of an antidepressant. You have to go extremely slowly, taking almost half the amount of time you were on the drug to come off, to do so safely and not go psychotic.
Wow.
So Corey, within that 3-week period, was taken down off of the Paxil and up on the Effexor that they changed him to. And Effexor was the first company to add homicidal ideation to their list of side effects.
Wow.
So what happened was he had taken the highest dose. They told him to work up to the highest dose, which was 300 milligrams. And the day he took that, he told his parents he really didn't feel very good and thought he should go back to bed for a while. And then he would go to school later when he woke up. Well, he went to bed He didn't wake up. He went to school before that. So when they had to tell him what he did. He held 23 classmates at gunpoint for 45 minutes, and to this day remembers none of it. He would point the gun at the kids and then put it under his chin for a while, and then pointed at the kids and put it under his chin. And this was a good kid. I mean, he was finishing his Eagle Scout Award. He was getting ready to serve a 2-year mission for his church. He was just shy.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And it's just horrible. I mean, it destroyed his life, it destroyed his family. Mm-hmm. He did turn the gun over to his teacher. He knew the teacher, and the teacher talked to him long enough to get him to turn it over. But Corey did not wake up until he was in juvenile detention and had no idea how he got there.
That's amazing. Well, yeah. You mentioned the fact that the reason they gave him the drug was not because he was violent or a bad kid or anything like that. It was because he was shy.
I know. And I was voted the most bashful in my senior class. Boy, am I glad they didn't have these drugs around then.
Yeah, you and me both. I wouldn't ever be called the most bashful, but I would have been one of those kids that they would have called hyperactive. So I would have gotten it anyway. So
they would have got you one way or another.
Yeah, one way or the other. Let's talk about that. That young man, his father actually testified before the Food and Drug Administration, didn't he? And talking yes. about the impacts of that on their family. Tell our listeners a little about that, about how that whole dynamic is starting to move the dialogue along.
He definitely got more attention than anyone at that meeting.
Yeah.
But actually, he stood beside Corey while Corey talked about what happened until Corey broke down and just couldn't talk anymore. Mm-hmm. And at that point, his dad stepped forward with his hand on Corey's back, leaned into the mic, and he has this really deep, bellowing voice. And he looked at the panel and he said, "These drugs are hell. Look what they've done to my son." And then turned and they both walked away. But they had to give up their farm. They were not allowed within 25 miles of their hometown any longer. So really? They were completely relocated. Yeah.
So they had to give up their farm because of this?
Well, they couldn't go 25 miles near it, so.
Wow. Yeah. I didn't realize that. That's absolutely amazing. Well, Thumper, I would like to show a few of these little short clips. We've got some on there that talk about the psychotropic drugs. And Ann, I want you to maybe talk a little about this, because the two shooters that we had in the one in Ohio and the other one in Texas, they talked about how they were right-wing, extremists and all this stuff. Tell our listeners what they ended up actually finding out about these people and about how they really were involved.
I know the guy in Ohio was not right-wing. He was Democrat. He had that all over his Facebook page, but he was on antidepressants. They said he also had alcohol and cocaine. But people need to know that there is these drugs, the antidepressants, are notorious for inducing mania. And there are there's like 100 types of manias, which I never knew before I did all of this.
Wow.
One of those is the first thing that I saw when I began researching these drugs, which is the cravings for alcohol.
Mm. I didn't realize
because
that.
I was in Utah, and everybody knows that Utah's mainly Mormon, or used to be. I don't know that it still is, but most people at that time did not drink. So you look at these people around you who were staunch Mormon, and all of a sudden they're alcoholic almost overnight. And you're going, what's going on? Two of them were good friends of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And both of them kept asking me, would you look into this? Would you look into this drug? And finally, I heard the fear in their voice and started looking. And so that's why, and I realized when I stopped by a pharmacy and picked up a package insert, there it was. It was hypoglycemia. And I've always known that alcoholism is hypoglycemia.
Mm-hmm.
It's when your blood sugar drops, you crave anything that's going to bring it up quickly because you're losing brain cells immediately. And so, anyway, they have got what they call dipsomania, which is actually cravings for alcohol.
Wow. I did not realize that. Thumper, let's play a little bit of video here, and I'd love to, and then we can talk more with Ann about the side effects of these drugs.
All right, here we go.
America has been struck with 2 mass shootings in less than 24 hours, the latest toll in its long relationship with firearms. At least one is being treated as domestic terrorism, an attack by a white supremacist. On Sunday, a young man killed 9 people in Dayton, Ohio. Dozens more were injured. The shooter was wearing body armor and used a military-style rifle.
Okay. Well, Ann, obviously, they blame everything on guns, and you have a lot more information on this shooter, and that's what you were just alluding to. But let's talk about this young man.
Well, were you going to show anything with somebody talking about him, or do you want me to tell you?
I kind of want you to tell our listeners a little bit more about this young man.
Okay.
You did some research on this.
Yeah, he had problems for some time, so he obviously had been on the drugs for a while. He had a list of people that he wanted to kill. He also had a list of girls he wanted to rape. That's a different one. But
wow,
nymphomania is another form of mania. And that's one thing that in my 2006 testimony to the FDA I included. Because I had an LAPD officer call me right around the year 2000. And he said, I want a doctor who is going to be honest with me about why I see Prozac in so many cases. He said, I don't understand what it is with child abuse, especially child sexual abuse and Prozac.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it goes back to the nymphomanic effects of the drug.
Right. Well, we've and they keep blaming the wrong things. He talks about this BBC or UK newsman talks about how America has this long-standing romance with firearms, when in fact he ought to be talking about we've got this long-standing relationship with pharmaceutical companies and psychotropic drugs.
Exactly.
Yeah. We
use something like 80% of what they produce. It's awful.
Worldwide. Yeah, worldwide. I mean, it's amazing. This clip here, this is the Dayton mayor, and it's amazing to me. She talks about her fear. Let's play that clip, Thumper, if you would, please.
There's no place that, you could say, oh, I just don't want to ever go anywhere. So as far as the safety of the district, it's one of the safest places.
These shootings are sure to reopen America's debate about gun regulation. Democrats have called for greater oversight of the sale of these types of rifles, something opposed by most Republicans. U.S. President Donald Trump had this reaction to the mass shooting.
Hate has no place in our country. And
okay. We have to stop there for the 27-second thing.
Okay. And we'll pick up on the other side of this, but that Dayton mayor, immediately they start talking about, the problems with the guns and how everyone now, her early part of her comment was, I'm afraid to go out at night. Now, this is from the mayor. This is trying to instill fear in our citizens of guns, and not talking about the fear we ought to have for all these psychotropic drugs.
That's right. In fact, I could show you a text I just got last week, I think it was, from Mark Taylor, who was known as the Columbine Wonder Boy. Mm-hmm. And he, because he survived 6 to 13 bullets that day. And when he got to the hospital, the doctor actually called his family physician and said, I have your patient here. He's dead, but he's talking to me.
Really?
That's how bad he was. Yeah.
Wow.
So he is the only one that had the courage to go through with the lawsuit against the drug maker for Columbine. Mm-hmm. The other families were scared off by the attorneys who told them if they did not win their lawsuit, that they would come after them and take everything that they had.
Really?
I believe they had the nerve to say that to those families. One was Dave Sanders' wife, the school teacher that slowly bled to death because nobody went in to help him.
Did the drug companies give them some sort of a settlement in spite of the fact that they actually dropped the cases?
No, not that I know of.
Okay.
No, they just destroyed the case is what they did.
I see.
But
okay.
Anyway, he sent me a text and asked if I'd heard about the West Texas shooting in El Paso. And I said, of course, Mark, that's what I do. And I don't generally talk to him about the shootings. I try to hope he misses a lot of them because I know it's hard on him. Mm-hmm. I was with him when Virginia Tech happened, and he really had a rough time. So anyway, he asked if I'd heard, and I told him that it was the 4th shooting we'd had in 2 weeks. And he texted back a text that the whole world needs to see. He said, nowhere is safe anymore, are they?
Wow.
And I said, no, there isn't, Mark. I've been looking for a place that's safe. But unfortunately, there are doctors and drug companies everywhere you go. Mm-hmm. So, and he understand. He knew, because I had already mentioned to him that the shooter in El Paso, his father was a psychiatrist, and I've heard rumors the mother was a nurse, but I haven't confirmed that one yet. Mm-hmm. The father being a psychiatrist is pretty much enough, and the father had headed a 143-bed psych hospital until just a year before.
Mm-hmm. And I know I've seen the videos of that father, and that father was
really out there.
Yeah, really out there. He's like an old hippie or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. Thumper, let's go ahead and play the rest of this. And there's a great comment at the end of this.
All right, here we go.
Place in our country. and we're going to take care of it. But this is also a mental illness problem. If you look at both of these cases, this is mental illness.
The president is expected to address the nation on Monday morning. The El Paso suspect, a 21-year-old man from Allen, Texas, has been charged with capital murder.
Okay, we'll stop for a minute. It's pretty interesting, the comments on the El Paso shooter. Mark Collins, who is a pastor, was at the San Antonio shooting that happened about 2 years ago. And he's also going to be one of our speakers at the Red Pill. And he's
good.
going to be
got an article for him.
Yeah, you're going to enjoy visiting with Mark. He's the gentleman who ends up, he is the exact likeness of George Washington. And
really?
Yeah. He's actually had a life mask made at 53 years old, and you can't tell one from the other. The only difference is it's amazing. It really is. But anyway, he's going to be one of our speakers, and he'll be someone that I know you'll find very, very interesting, because he had to console. He was actually, he had been the pastor of that church, and when that shooting happened, the pastor that had been assigned there after him had his son, and apparently several close family members had been shot. And so Mark came in and consoled a lot of those families, and he's got a lot of the details on what happened, which probably will be very important to you. Thumper, can we play the end of that one piece there?
Oh, okay. Just a moment here. Give me a moment.
And by the way, the mental illness is just as big an escape as the guns. It's not mental illness. It's drug-induced psychosis. There's a big difference.
That's
like someone slipping you LSD in your drink every day.
Right. That's why your message is so important today.
Yeah.
That's why your message is so important. Let's go ahead and finish this out.
Okay, here we go.
The district attorney has said that he will seek the death penalty. Authorities say the case is being treated as domestic terrorism and that the suspect is cooperating. The designation of terrorism suggests these killings were carried out with a political motive in mind, and that a 4-page manifesto published online is authentic.
Toby Muse, CGTN, Washington.
Okay. And those 4-page manifestos are so typical of mania.
Mm-hmm. They are.
Part they don't mention.
Well, they didn't mention the fact that 4-page manifesto was by someone who sounded like he was a communist. Isn't that?
Oh, well, they get so delusional that they start going into all kinds of really bizarre groups. They've done that from day one. We've heard that from the very beginning. People that were never into some really bizarre fringe groups, that's just what they do. They turn, like, their personality turns just the opposite. That's what it was before.
Well,
and they amass guns. They amass bats, baseball bats. They love baseball bats. In fact, I went into the Columbine evidence room looking for the baseball bats. I didn't care about anything else.
Wow.
But they amass bombs, pipe bombs, just anything that you can imagine that could be used as a weapon. They start gathering them as they go in and out of the toxic state.
Can I got a question for Ann. Is it all right?
Sure.
Ann, well, actually, a couple. One is, are you seeing any positive effect from the Trump administration? Secondly, your last couple of comments there, you were looking at the violence caused by these Antifa people. Do you think there's a correlation with those folks and these types of drugs?
It would not surprise me at all. In fact, I don't think a lot of people know that antidepressants are what they give suicide bombers. And they have done that for years and years and years. In fact, after 9/11, there was an LA Times reporter that went over to the Middle East to interview the Taliban psychiatrist. I thought, oh my gosh, you mean they have their own psychiatrist? Mm-hmm. And he talked about a young girl that was in the office. He also said that there were posters up all over the office for antidepressants. And the girl, halfway through their interview, butted into the conversation and said, oh, doctor, do we need to sacrifice another goat so I can feel better? He said, nay, Allah has given these drugs such great power that swallowing them is like swallowing a little piece of God.
Wow.
Tell me he was not medicating absolutely everyone who walked in.
Wow.
And you know what Corey's father said when he heard that? He said, oh, the new sacrament, huh?
Wow.
Yeah.
The new sacrament.
Satan's sacrament is what he said after that. So,
wow. That is amazing.
And it's true. People tell me they lose their agency to act on their own with the very first pill.
Wow.
And so many say they feel possessed. Even atheists have told me that the only way that they could describe it is that they were possessed.
Wow. That is a frightening thought. Well, you know, you've been at the very pinnacle of the expose of these drugs. You've been before Congress. You've been before the FDA. You've been one of the leading experts in the country. You've written books. Tell our listeners maybe some of the, I guess I would have to say, some of the attacks on you personally for being a leader in this movement to try to expose what these drugs do.
Well, they've just done everything that they could to keep me from being able to get to the public. Like I was writing articles for, there are two major papers in Salt Lake City, the Salt Lake Tribune and the Deseret News. And they had a section in both papers called the Citizen section. And it was articles by people in the public. Well, someone suggested I send them one, and I did. And they wanted more, and they wanted more. And after several articles, suddenly that section of the paper disappeared. So that was my first sign that somebody really didn't want this out. And then, let me think. There's been so many things. I did the Lisa Gibbons show on mothers on these drugs killing their children. We did that in 1999. And as we walked onto the stage to do the show, and I'm walking onto the stage with a father who's just lost his two children and his wife, who killed them both and then herself. Mm-hmm. They had the nerve to tell us we could say the word antidepressant, but we could not say the brand names of these drugs because of their advertisers. Mm. Well, I checked not long ago because Lisa really did a good show. She's a good interviewer. And within 3 months, her show was history. Really? I knew it had gone off the air. I didn't realize it had gone off that quickly. So obviously she did too good a job. Mm-hmm. So there was another thing. And then I was doing 3 and 4 hour radio shows with Coast to Coast AM. And Ian Punnett is who I did most of those shows with, and who's also an excellent interviewer. And Ian had said one night, he said, you light up my board with calls more than any other guest I have ever had, except for maybe, I can't remember his name. He's the earthquake guy who's really knows a lot about earthquakes. Anyway, he said, you too bring in more callers. There's more interest on your shows than any other show that I've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end of 2001, which was the year of Andrea Yates drowning her children and 12-year-old Christopher Pittman shooting his grandparents and burning the house down, the end of that year, the show was bought out, changed ownership. I've never been on again except for one maybe very short 15-minute piece.
Really?
And that's it. Yeah.
Wow.
So to me, it looked like they probably were the ones behind the buyout.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe but also Amazon right at that same time told the world that my book was no longer in print. And I called them over and over and over again saying, I'm the author. The book is not out of print. It is still available. You are actually killing people by telling them that there is nowhere to go to get this information because they don't know how to get off these drugs safely. And they didn't care. They could have cared less. I threatened them with an attorney. They didn't care.
Wow.
But I found out years later that they also had a $600,000 contract with the CIA. Mm-hmm. And if people read my book, they would understand the CIA connections that we've found with these drugs that are very telling.
Yeah.
And very frightening.
If I may, Dan, and we've on Patriot Soapbox here, we have covered that connection very, very heavily. And
good.
If you want to come back and continue a conversation on another one of our other shows, you're more than welcome, because this is a very important topic here. And I want to say thank you to Dan for inviting you today. Tremendous information that you're providing. Thank you.
Well, at Thumper, I was actually, I was going to ask Ann to talk about that, because she and I have talked about this in the past off air in programs like MK Ultra, where the CIA was really actively involved in experimentation on prisoners, on military personnel. There's quite a history there. Go ahead. Let's talk about
now
that.
They've expanded it to the entire public.
Yeah, exactly. This is an extension of it.
It is.
And let's talk about LSD. That you've got an interesting history of how that happened in the CIA and the Swiss connection there.
Right.
Let's talk about that.
When the CIA was first formed, they took 80% of their initial budget. So obviously, this was really priority for them to use 80% of their initial budget. They put it in a brown paper bag and sent 2 agents off to Switzerland with all that money to buy up all of the LSD that Sandoz Pharmaceutical Company, who was the one putting it out at the time, had. And when they got there, they found out that they were still growing up from ergot fungus, so they only had maybe a couple of ounces. They had hardly any LSD. And they said, this isn't going to work. If we want to use this as our mind control drug, we're going to have a whole lot bigger supply than what you're getting with growing it. So we need a synthetic version. So they grabbed their brown paper bag and headed back to the U.S., went straight to Eli Lilly. Eli Lilly is the maker of Prozac, in case people don't know that. And they told them that they said, we need a synthetic version of this. Well, they got the answer back, sure. And they said, we need a lot of it. And they said, we can deliver it by the truckload. So they became the manufacturers of the synthetic version of LSD for the CIA. And what's really interesting is that Sandoz Pharmaceutical in Switzerland, who initially put it on the market as a drug to chemically induce insanity, psychosis, so that doctors could then figure out how psychosis develops. Well, when Lilly went to put it out, their synthetic version, just a month or two before they got their patent, was either Look or Life magazine, which were the two big ones at the time, that ran a big spread, front page spread on this wonderful new drug that was going to cure mental illness and cure alcoholism and aid in psychoanalysis. Had a whole new makeover.
Wow. And it was the same drug, only a synthetic version of it.
Yeah. But we're now supposed to believe that this drug that was created to cause psychosis is going to cure it.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And that's why drug companies spend more money on marketing than they ever do on research and development.
And that's something that I think our listeners need to hear a little bit more about, too, is that now there's a big push by Congress to reduce the cost of drugs. And one of the things that the drug companies are talking about is how they spend way more money in research than any other country in the world. And isn't, in fact, the lion's share of their money they spend is on marketing and bribes to buy off Congress people?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's documented all around the world. They've been doing that. They've gotten in trouble for paying off doctors in China, Italy. They've had to pay huge, huge fines for doing that. Pfizer's been found guilty of racketeering, RICO, which should have put them out of business, but they finagled some way of a small drug company that they had just merged with or taken possession of. They bought them out.
Took the hit.
That company took the hit for them.
Yeah, that's how it works. I want our listeners to know, and all these things that you just talked about, these are things that are documented, and these are things that you've researched extensively. Isn't that right?
Oh, yeah. There's 21 pages just of references in the back of my book. Just those short little references in small print. 21.
Well, let's talk about your book and then the organizations that you are supporting. And we're running pretty close to the end of the program, so I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit more about your work and your book so that people can buy them.
Okay, the book is available in ebook format only at this point because it is finally out of print. It's a long story as to why I published it myself, but there was good reason. It would have held it up for a long time had I not done it that way. So I have spent everything that I had, including all of the equity in my home, which is now gone. But I knew that that was a possibility, but my children are growing up in this world, and my grandchildren are now, and a house can be replaced, but lives cannot.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew how important it was to get this out. So anyway, it's available online at our website at drugawareness.org, drugawareness.org. And you can find it there. You can find tons of information on the website. You can watch the movie that I said is up there about children and drugging. And also, there is a CD that I have that explains more about the drugs and how to come off of the drugs, what you need to do. We have like 50 Facebook groups as well for all the different drugs and some of the serious side effects where we address what's going on. Also, you'll find a statement by Dr. Candace Pert. Candace's research was used to make these drugs possible. She came out in 1997 calling them monsters that she wishes she had never had anything to do with their development, which is something that anyone who is on these drugs needs to read. I would want to know if the developer had said something like that, calling the drug I'm popping in my mouth a monster. Candace joined me at that point. She'll tell you that, well, she'll tell you I'm a hero, but she's very grateful for the book and all the information that it puts out for everyone. She actually lost her own sister to these drugs. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I didn't meet her until her sister was already in withdrawal, and it apparently gone too far. And we don't know if she had a heart attack or if she committed suicide. But she lost her sister to the drugs, so she definitely learned it all firsthand. Mm-hmm. And then also they'll find an interview that I did. Well, I didn't do it. I had somebody else do it, but I was with the doctor who paid the bribe to get these drugs on the market and came out and told everyone, confessed what he had done. So I think everybody needs to hear that as well. They also need to know that George Bush was behind most of this, which I only just learned in the last few years. I knew that there was some type of CIA connection. I didn't realize what George Bush was up to.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap up here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We are, Ann, thank you. And I want our listeners, go to redpillexpo.org. Ann is going to be one of our speakers at that event in Mesquite, Nevada. And Patrick, turn it over to you. Patrick Howley is our next program. And Ann, thank you again. And we'll see you in a few weeks.
All right. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution. Now an enemy from within would enslave us all again and deprive us of our rights in the Constitution. Restore the Republic. Wake up, it's time to understand. Restore the Republic. We're losing our freedom in the land.